We will now dig a little deeper into the rules and principles of medical documentation. When you complete this section, you should know the rules related to medical documentation, be able to tell the difference between subjective and objective writing, and recognize and be able to use the preferred method of documentation for the medical setting.
Accurate documentation in the individual's file, service logs, and progress notes is an important part of your job. The client records allow all members of the care team, from the direct care providers, the waiver support coordinators, and the healthcare providers, to have access to information needed to assist the people we are caring for appropriately. Documentation is used as the basis for billing for client services. Provider agencies and solo providers are required to keep certain information in their files, including your documentation, and are subject to recoupment if their files are not accurate and complete. The agency you are working with provides you with training concerning documentation you are required to do for them. Let's go over some basic information related to medical documentation. Medical documentation is a legal document. You are not allowed to erase, scratch out, or white out mistakes. If you make an error, draw a single line through the incorrect information, write error, and then initial. You should still be able to read the incorrect information. Medical documentation is confidential and is covered by HIPAA regulations. Only people who have a reason to know should have access to the personal health information. This includes your service logs and progress notes. Medical documentation should be brief, but you should include enough information that is clear and complete. Medical documentation should be written objectively. There are two types of documentation, objective and subjective. When you are writing objectively, you are stating facts. It is very similar to the method you used when writing a lab report in a high school science class. When you write subjectively, you may find you weave in your opinions, feelings, and beliefs. Subjective writing works well for social media, letters, and emails, but there are very few instances that this form of writing is appropriate in medical documentation. As I had mentioned earlier, objective documentation is similar to writing a lab report. It is fact-based, measurable, and observable method. You observe what is going on and then record it. You use your senses. What did you see? What did you hear? What did you smell? How did it feel? The texture, the temperature, etc. In medical documentation, I can't really think of any situations when you would use your sense of taste. It is fairly straightforward when you are documenting about your observations. However, it can get a bit tricky if you are writing about some things that someone tells you in response to a question. For instance, if you ask the individual you are caring for, "How bad does it hurt?" his answer would be subjective because it is based on how he's feeling. If he or she is stoic, they may not say it hurt, but you see bruising, swelling, and they wince or pull back when you touch the affected area. An example of how you would document in this situation is, John B. states it doesn't hurt when asked about the injured area. John said he slipped on the stairs and fell while getting off the bus and landed on his arm when it hit the ground. The lower portion of his right arm is bruised and swollen. John winces and pulls his arm away when it is gently touched. His watch was removed and his arm is elevated on a pillow. A call was placed to the supervisor, and we are awaiting transportation to take him to the urgent care facility. Objective language includes phrases such as, "I saw," "I counted," "This is what he did," "She said," "He stated," "The sound he made sounded like." Remember, objective information can be described, imitated, may be counted, and should be the same if more than one person described it. Subjective documentation incorporates the writer's opinion, judgment, assumptions, and beliefs. It could include information that is rumors or suspicions. Subjective language would include phrases like, he did not want to, she doesn't like, he feels, she needs to, and so on. How you document answers to questions objectively. Remember, when I mentioned what did you hear? When you are documenting something someone tells you, write, whoever says it, states, whatever he or she said, and be sure to enclose it in quotations. In summary, objective documentation is the preferred method of writing for official or medical documentation. Statements are factual, measurable, and can be described. When reading a properly written document, solid and logical decisions may be made. Remember, your notes are used to assist people in meeting their goals and may be used when making medical decisions. If notes are written subjectively, it may have a big impact on the life of the person you are documenting about. What would you envision if you read a progress note that says, Jimmy was acting crazy like. He thinks it's okay to be aggressive and hit the wall. All the other clients think he's scary and going to hurt them. When in all actuality, the story is entirely different when written objectively. Jimmy suddenly started hitting the wall and pacing. His actions are similar to behaviors he demonstrates when he is anxious or overwhelmed. The behavior began when Alan and Joseph started to argue. Based on the first note, he could be admitted or given additional medication that is unnecessary and unwarranted. With objective notes, professionals working with Jimmy could develop a plan to assist him in coping with stressful situations.
Avoid haunting documentation. The words you choose today could come back to haunt you tomorrow. Always think about what you're going to write before you pick up that pen. Your progress notes and service logs are legal documents and part of the person's client record. The records are reviewed, monitored, and retained, and in the case of a lawsuit or criminal investigation, they may be key pieces of evidence. The words you choose, and sometimes seemingly harmless bits of subjective information you include in the record, could hurt you in a lawsuit or chart review. For example, several terms like by mistake, accidentally, miscalculated, or confusing can conjure up images of a care provider error, compromised safety, and possibly wrongdoing. Please help prevent haunting documentation by writing objectively and truthfully. Do your documentation as you provide the service rather than waiting. That way, it'll be fresh in your mind.
I can't stress enough the importance of your progress notes, service logs, and all of the other record-keeping requirements associated with your job. There are a lot of forms we'll be looking at shortly. With a form to fill out, at least you have a guideline to follow. The form prompts you to include the information that is needed and necessary. But what do you do when all you have is a blank page and you just have to start writing? I have made a list of some documentation do's and don'ts to help you with that. First, be sure you have the correct record before you begin writing. Remember, when you make a mistake, you put a single line through, write error, and your initials. An occasional mistake may happen. We're all human. If several records contain errors, or if it is a frequently occurring situation, your supervisor, APD monitors, or others may begin to wonder about the quality of your care and your attention to detail. Write legibly. The record is of no use to anyone if you can't read it. Service logs, progress notes, and other forms of documentation are necessary for providing appropriate care and as justification for billing for services rendered. Write about the care you provided at the time you provide it, not before or at the end of the shift. I understand there are days that documentation is the last thing on your mind. Meeting the needs of the person you are caring for is your primary concern. If you're having one of those days, be sure to jot down notes with times and memory joggers to help you when you can do your notes. This practice should only be an occasional occurrence. It is always a better practice to do your paperwork as soon as you possibly can after providing the service. This helps prevent errors and decreases the potential of you forgetting to document something. Write the time you provided the service or gave a PRN medication. Be sure that you also write about the person's response to the medication approximately 30 minutes after administering or supervising the self-administration. If you remember an important point later in the shift, or even the next day when you come back to work, write the information with the notation late entry. Then put the date and the time associated with the information you are adding. Please note, the date and time you put on the progress notes will be the actual date and time you are adding the information. Example, date June 5th, 2018, time 10 a.m., late entry. On June 4th, 2018, at 5 p.m., I received a call from Sally's support coordinator, Amy Grant. She wanted to change the time of the support plan meeting to June 15th at 11:15 a.m. I double-checked with Sally to be sure that the time and date were good for her, and she said it was. I recorded it on the appointment calendar and notified my supervisor of the change. When recording phone calls that are concerning the person you are caring for, be sure to include the exact time, the message, and who you spoke with. The message portion of the above example demonstrates the technique for recording this type of message. Write about any safety precautions and preventative measures that are used, such as making sure the seat belts are fastened before starting the vehicle and making sure everyone gets out of the van when you get to your destination. By writing about safety precautions and prevention measures, it helps you to remember always to follow the health and safety protocols. It is heartbreaking when you hear of incidents that could have been avoided, like people dying because they were left in a hot van in the summer. Document enough to tell the whole story. You don't need to write the great American novel, but you do need to be sure to give enough information so the person reading the entry will have a good understanding of what tasks were completed or what happened. Don't chart care ahead of time. Something may happen and you may be unable to provide the care or service you have recorded. You would not believe some of the things I have seen when doing chart reviews. A resident of a nursing home, according to the record, had been fed over one-half of his lunch 3 hours after his death. He especially liked the potatoes. Entries like this make you wonder how accurate the documentation concerning food consumption was for other days. Don't alter a client's record. This is a criminal offense. Going back and changing notes to hide a mistake or because you didn't do something the doctor ordered, especially if it caused harm to the patient, is a criminal offense. Documenting care that you have not done is considered fraud. Medicaid fraud is serious business. I recall several years ago reading on the APD website about a care provider that was going to Gold's Gym to work out, leaving his client in the car to wait for him, and then billing for services during that time. Needless to say, he got caught and is now a guest of the Department of Corrections for many years. Don't write about a symptom, such as complaining of pain, without also writing about what you did. Remember, with medical documentation, if you don't write it down, it didn't happen. Even if you're documenting on the MAR that you medicated the person with PRN Tylenol, you also need to indicate in the progress notes what you did for the complaint of pain. Be sure that you not only make the entry that he was medicated, but also what was his response to the medication. If it was effective, awesome. If not, what did you do next? Don't write imprecise descriptions such as bed was soaked or he drank a lot of bottled water. Both of these descriptions are subjective. How much is a lot of water? Remember, objective documentation must be measurable. It would be better to write that he drank a liter of bottled water. Don't use shorthand or abbreviations that are not widely accepted. Major confusion can occur if you use your own shorthand and abbreviations. I was reading in a pharmacology book an example of this type of misunderstanding that led to lost man-hours and the potential for a medical error. The doctor wrote an order that the patient could take his own EPO while in the hospital. When the order was sent to the pharmacy, as part of the quality assurance program, the pharmacist checked the labs and found the patient was not anemic and his medical history did not reflect anything that would require epoprotein, which helps your body make and produce red blood cells. The pharmacy called the nurse, who in turn had to track down the doctor to clarify the order. Several hours later, the clarification process was completed. It turns out that the doctor used the abbreviation EPO, which is recognized abbreviation for epoprotein, instead of writing out evening primrose oil. Don't write about what someone else said, heard, felt, smelled, unless the information is critical. In that case, use quotations and attribute the remarks appropriately. Remember, reporting what someone else is relating to you is subjective. When the information is significant, subjective language may be found in medical or legal records. However, the data would be made objectively. For instance, one of the individuals living in the group home saw a missing person leave. You would record, James H. stated, I saw Mary sneak out of the backyard after lunch.
At approximately 7 p.m., I heard a scream, then crying, coming from the kitchen. Janice C. was standing at the kitchen sink, staring at her left hand. Blood was dripping from a cut to her left index finger. I handed her a paper towel and instructed her to put direct pressure on the wound while I retrieved and put on gloves. I pulled back the paper towel and found a cut approximately an inch long. It started bleeding freely when we removed the paper towel. I placed a sterile gauze pad on the cut and applied direct pressure. I called my supervisor to request help to care for the other residents while I took Janice to the emergency room to have her cut evaluated and treated.
Perfect. The writer used objective phrases when describing the situation, such as, I heard a scream and crying coming from the kitchen. Blood was dripping from her left hand. Standing at the kitchen sink staring at her left hand. Cut was approximately 1 inch. The actions he or she took were precisely described. The statements were factual and measurable. There would be a very good chance if someone else described what happened, it would be close to the same description. I'm sorry, your answer is incorrect. The writer used many objective phrases when describing the situation, such as, I heard a scream and crying coming from the kitchen. Blood was dripping from her left hand. Standing at the kitchen sink staring at her left hand. Cut was approximately 1 inch. The actions that he or she took were precisely described and repeatable. Remember, subjective writing incorporates the writer's opinion, judgment, assumptions, and beliefs. It may even include information that is rumors or suspicion. It was the middle of a stormy night. With all of the lightning and thunder, all of the residents were terrified. We decided to go into the living room and watch a Disney movie to take everyone's mind off the storm. All of a sudden, the lights went out and Bobby D freaked out. He went running into the kitchen, slipped on the floor, and cracked his head on the counter. When I got there with a flashlight, there was a huge puddle of blood, and he was lying on the floor. He had a really big gash on his head. I put gloves on and put pressure on the cut. I had the other staff member, Patty, call 911 and the supervisor. When EMS got there, they took him to the hospital. Perfect. The writer used many subjective phrases when describing the situation, such as, all of the residents were terrified. Bobby D freaked out. Huge puddle of blood. Really big gash. This was his or her opinion, but was not a precise description, and there would be a very good chance if someone else described what happened, it would be somewhat different. I'm sorry, your answer is incorrect. The writer used many subjective phrases when describing the situation, such as, all of the residents were terrified. Bobby D freaked out. Huge puddle of blood. And really big gash. Remember, objective writing must be fact-based, measurable, and observable. Objective information can be described, imitated, may be counted, and should be the same if one or more persons described it.